I am so glad that you're sitting here. It's not our keynote speaker. And I was remembering the titles of her books. And what did she do but walk in with three of these books? And I just want to read these titles. Sacred Pampering Principles, Sacred Pampering Principles, An African American Woman's Guide to Self-Care and Inner Renewal. All the joy you can stand. I'm ready. 101 Sacred Power Principles for making joy real in your life. And the love lives. Love lives. 10 revelations that will transform your relationships and enrich your love life. The love lives. Debrena Jackson Gandy is a writer. A writer of all kinds of writing. She, like many of us in African American writers, self-published. But she went further than a number of us have not gone. She was able to have her books picked up by a publisher. And what she's going to talk to us this evening, or this afternoon about, is the impact of having this material. And that's quite similar to what I said this morning. We can tell, well, first imagine, because there are all of these people, I know many of them, who imagine these great stories, but here it is. And they'll tell you about them, but they never go any farther. And then there are those of us who write the stories, but we won't share. And then there are some of us who write, we may get them self-published, but when we can get them published by a publisher, somebody who doesn't cheat us, somebody who honestly distributes them and not someone who lies to us about marketing, then we can have a greater impact. And Debrena has managed to do this. And only a small percentage of authors can say this. It pleases me to know that I can say, I may not have known Debrena a long time, but I know her parents. We went to school together. So she comes from good stuff. And it's just so wonderful, what do they say? To see our children do well. And she has done extremely well. But what's really beautiful is she wants others to do well. And she does everything that she possibly can to help others do well. Yes. So I say to you, sit back, relax, and learn. She is a teacher. She is a wonderful role model. Thank you. Yes, yes.
Wow, I did not know I was being introduced by the legendary Georgia McDade.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Small but mighty, yeah.
Yes.
So good afternoon, geniuses. Good afternoon, geniuses.
Good afternoon.
Well, I first just want to thank some of the folks who made this amazing inaugural conference happen. We already have seen Dr. Georgia McDade, who I consider keeper of the flame, bearer of the torch, cultural custodian, the African American Writers Alliance, who had this organization going on when I was working on my books, when I was still self-published. So it's so good to see the organization and Georgia still here. So can we please?
Yes. Yes.
And I know there are some other fabulous souls that made this day happen. I want to thank Melanie Bell. Where is our previous director? Where is Melanie, our president? Is she not even in here? So Melanie Bell, Moni Irvin, Quaylen Muir, Dr. Tracy Harrell, some of the Langston Hughes team, Mary Ann, is that Matthew up in the booth? Roquisha, everyone who made this possible. Can we give them a hand? Well, I must say that I am really delighted and honored to be asked to be the keynote at this inaugural conference, because it's very easy for the committee to have chosen somebody from out of state and flew them in, but y'all chose your local homegirls.
Sí.
Born in Louisiana, raised in Lacey, but living here in Seattle since 1990. So thank you to whoever put my name in the hat.
Tracy.
Oh my goodness. So for those who put my name in the hat, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm actually really particularly excited about this opportunity because, you know, after speaking at a lot of conferences and writers' conferences, the classic question, being interviewed, the classic question is, so how did you come to your first book? And they want to kind of the story of how the very first book, and then from there, how it happened. But today I get to share with you the origins of the journey long before the first book, because I think that's important, because every experience, every step, every year, all of that culminated in when the first national book deal came, and the second national book deal, the third national book deal. So I want you to understand the whole continuum and not just the event of when the national book deals were landed. So I want to also just acknowledge some locally based authors, and also just giving homage going back to 1773, Phyllis Wheatley, who 251 years ago was the first African American to publish a book in the United States. I didn't say 1873 after the Emancipation Proclamation, I said 1773. And she also had national acclaim, so I speak her name. I also want to call out names of some of our locally based authors. We had a panel of some of the African American Writers Alliance members sharing before, so all of them, their names are automatically included in this. But I also want to include names of folks who are still living, every single one of them as far as I know. Of course, Dr. Mona Lake Jones.
Yes.
The name of Charlotte Watson Sherman, the name of Dr. Quintar Taylor, Julia Boyd, D. Black, Sunday Hour Morning House, new young brother author Philip Jacobs, Dr. Georgia McDade, Dr. Joy Hardiman, Octavia Butler, Clyde Ford, and August Wilson, to name a few. So early on in my life, right around 5th grade, that was a time of great awakening for me when I was a whopping 10 years old. It became clear to me that being able to write a powerful word and speak a powerful word was an awesome 1-2 punch. Because I figured if something happened to me and I couldn't write anymore, I could speak. If something happened where I couldn't speak anymore, I could still write. So I figured I would never ever be silenced if I knew how to do both of those. And the love affair actually that I have with words actually goes back to when I was a little girl with my mother, Dr. Thelma Jackson, would take trips to the East Coast for all the conferences she was involved in. Both she and my dad were very, very involved civically, politically. They grew the largest Black-owned business in Thurston County. They had 33 employees, lived on 8 acres of land, held an annual gathering for all the African Americans in Lacey. They could all fit on our property at one time. That's how long we lived in Lacey. So they were both very, very, very involved. And my mother, who is a doctor of educational change and leadership, she would travel to the East Coast and go to events like this where there were vendors. But she would have to go to the East Coast to find vendors that had children's books that had images in it that looked like her little daughter, Debrena. And so she would bring back books that had little girls with braids in them, flashcards about Black history, got me a subscription of Ebony Jr., if you all remember Ebony Jr., a comic book with all Black historical characters. So that is really when my love of words and reading began to really be born. And then when I was the Christmas of my 10-year-old self, I got a very significant gift from my mom and dad that really got me thinking about writing as a profession. And it was a manual typewriter, meaning no electricity, plunk, 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 a manual typewriter in an attaché case, looked like a briefcase. And anywhere that I had a flat surface, I could put that attaché up with that manual typewriter inside, and I could twist in my typing paper, and I could type a story. And my mother, one of the field trips she would take us on was to bookstores. In those days, pre-Barnes & Noble, pre-Borders Books, which actually closed in 96, I think it was, 2006, pre-Amazon for sure, we had B. Dalton and we had Walden Books. And then we had independent booksellers. One of the most prolific right here in Seattle, the Elliott Bay bookstore that was down in Pioneer Square, now it's on Capitol Hill. So going to bookstores was one of my favorite field trips, and I would go to bookstores after getting this typewriter. I would look around at all the books on the shelf, all the rows of books, and I would turn my head sideways. And I said, wouldn't it be wonderful one day if I came into the bookstore and could read the spine of a book with my name on it? And that was at 10 years old after getting the typewriter. And so that is where the bug really started to develop. And I really am taking you all kind of on a journey so you can see kind of where the fire was lit and kind of along a timeline in my life, how we came to where I am today in the books that you saw Dr. McDade holding up. So then I was in high school and I was in my sophomore year. And I can't say I published, but I can say I created my very first book. I made it. And do you know I went and dug out this little book from 1983, y'all. Okay, this needs to be the Smithsonian. So this little book, I called it Le Livre de Debrena. Trying to be all fancy, it means the book of Debrena in French. Want to see it? Yeah. Woo! This is my first work. So that was at age 16 where I wrote Le Livre de Debrena. And actually, before we conclude today, if we have time, I actually have a poem out of there I would be glad to read to you all for my 16-year-old self. So then fast forward to, I'm in high school and I'm in advanced placement English. And I thought I kind of had some writing skills, but every time I got back an essay from Ms. Thomas, there'd always be all these red marks on it. And it would always be a B, a B minus, or a B plus. Now, one of the things she allowed us to do is you could resubmit your paper and upgrade your grade. So I would eventually get an A, but I had to do 1 or 2 submissions the same every time. Meanwhile, there was another student in the class, Diana Roll, I remember her name to this day, Diana Roll, who would always get A's on her first time out the gate with her paper. So I concluded maybe I'm not really cut out to be a writer. But what I didn't realize at the time is that I would go on to be a nonfiction writer, and we were reading fiction books by dead white men. And then I had to write essays about it. So that wasn't necessarily my passion spot. And it took me a while to figure out that's not even my genre, and I would rather read authors that maybe are nonfiction like I would be writing. So I'm glad I didn't stay parked on that, but I really had falsely concluded that maybe I wasn't cut out to be a writer. So one of the things I want to encourage all of you in the room, how many writers do we have in the room? Poets, rappers, authors, lyricists, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So for those of you who are writing books, I really encourage you to discover and know the type and genre of your writing. So then once I got to college, I decided to go to Pepperdine University. Do you all know where Pepperdine is? Pepperdine University is in Malibu, California, so Southern California. And I could have gone to Stanford, but when I went to visit Pepperdine for the campus visit, my soul said, this is your place, and it really was. Because there was 2 classes that I took at Pepperdine University that were particularly exciting to me. One was marketing, and one was public relations. Public relations, once again, is using words to position or make a pitch about a product, a service, or a person. And then marketing is really the art of moving a product or service to a sale. So there's a chain, a contract, an invoice, a payment. Little did I know how powerful those 2 classes would be in my journey. And again, PR was about using words in a powerful way to communicate and to create a response on the other end, and hopefully get a media booking is the primary purpose of a publicist when you have it for you as a person. So the theme I gave this presentation was the written word as an instrument of impact. So public relations was another expression of how you can use words powerfully. Same thing for marketing. So people often ask, as I mentioned at the beginning, well, Debrena, how did you get started with your first book? And when I was at Pepperdine, once a month I would trek along Malibu, Pacific Coast Highway, and I would go to a meeting in LA, the Black Women's Network. And it was this organization of fierce Black women in LA who were all movers and shakers and making things happen. And here I was, 21-year-old Debrena, their only junior member, driving in from college to sit at the feet of these amazing women. So then when I relocated to Seattle a few years later, they asked if I would return to LA to speak at their conference. So of course, for me, just a few years out of college, now being asked to speak at this conference with all these esteemed women that I had been meeting and caucusing with and taking notes and sitting at their feet and asking questions about the path of success, I was now going to be a workshop presenter at one of their conferences. So back in that day, because this was right around 1990, remember the old cassette albums where if a speaker had an album, you'd open up and have these cassette tapes you could pop out and pop into a cassette player. Those were the hot thing back then. We didn't even have CDs. CDs weren't even a hot thing yet. And I thought to myself, do I have time to do a cassette series? I'll have to go into the studio, get it edited. I said, no, I don't have time to do a cassette series, but I can write a book. And that is really how the seed of the very first book, the one that you saw Dr. McDade hold up, Sacred Pampering Principles, got born. I was going to this conference, and women were now in the workforce. They were now working in managerial and professional jobs. They were holding down 2 shifts at work and at home, and they were starting to experience burnout. So here I come with my book, Sacred Pampering Principles, that actually I printed at Kinko's, the name of FedEx office before it was FedEx office. So I go down to the conference with my box and my booklets saddle stitched, fancy language for staple down the middle. And they ate it up. They loved the book. So I came back from that and I said, I think I might be onto something. And so it took a couple more years and the book became a legitimate paperback. And what I mean by that is having an ISBN. And it was actually a publishing house, a Black publishing house out of Tacoma, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, called TAG, that took it from being that saddle-stitched booklet to my first self-published paperback. And this is what it looks like. I dug one of these out as well. So in those days, I was very green. I didn't know about the publishing industry. Here I was with this paperback and these boxes of books, and what was I going to do? I didn't know about literary agents. I didn't know about book distributors. And so I got a list of all the Black independent bookstores around the country, and I started smiling and dialing. Debrena, you were making phone calls to independent bookstores? Yes, I was, because I didn't know any better. And I figured if I could have the representative of the author call for me, that might have a little bit more credibility. So I picked up the phone, would call a bookstore, let's say Shrine of the Black Madonna in Houston, Texas. I would pick up the phone and I would ask to speak to the owner, because oftentimes book lovers own the bookstore and they're working actively in the bookstore at a day-to-day basis. And sure enough, the owner would come to the phone 9 out of 10 times. And I would say, hello, I am calling representing author Debrena Jackson Gandy and her new book, Sacred Patrick Principles. Have you heard of it? Of course, they said no every time. I said, no worries. We have a review copy for you. May we mail one to you and then follow up in 3 weeks to see if you'd like to place an order? Of course, they said yes. The review copy was free. That was the cost of doing business, some promotional copies. So I had my little chart, and I would see whose 3 weeks were up. I'd place the phone call and say, may we send you a shipment of Sacred Patrick Principles? That was how I first got copies of that little paperback in bookstores all around the country. But then right here in Seattle was Elliott Bay Book Company, one of the most famous bookstores in terms of size. It was known across the country. Authors always wanted to come to the Elliott Bay Book Company. They also, I don't know if you knew this, were the bookstore that inaugurated the author reading experience. When you gather people together, the author comes to read selections and answer questions. That started right here at Elliott Bay Book Company. So of course, I wanted to have my book at Elliott Bay Book Company. But again, I was green, I didn't know. So I picked up the phone. I said, I'm calling representing author Debrena Jackson Gandy on her new book, Sacred Patrick Principles. Have you heard of it? No, we haven't. I said, well, what's involved with getting it on your shelves? I represent the author. And they said, oh, that book needs to be with one of the distributors. I said, what are the names of those distributors? I didn't know anything about distributors, Ingram, etc. And so I hung up the phone. I said, gosh, that sounds complicated. And then I looked up distributors and the split they would take of the book cost. I said, oh, I don't want to go through any hoops. What am I doing? I was so glad that this conference was named GENUIS Conference, because this protein that resides in our skin really does generate extraordinary expressions and forms of genius. So I called on my melanin genius.
See.
I said, we got a situation. So I activated the genius with my melanin, and I came up with a scheme, a plan, a strategy. So I wrote out a list of 10 of my friends that I was going to call, ask them to call Elliott Bay Book Company, ask if they had Sacred Patrick Principles. I said, okay, Denise, you're going to call on Monday. Michelle, you're going to call on Wednesday. Everybody had a day to call. So I called back in 2 weeks, and they answered the phone. I said, hello, I'm calling representing author Debrena Jackson Gandy and her new book, Sacred Patrick Principles. Have you heard of it? Oh my gosh, everyone is calling asking for that book. where can we get it? What happened to the whole book distributor? I got that shipment ready to go on down to County and Bay Bookstore, and it was on the shelves.
Genius.
So I had it here in Seattle and had it in the bookstores around the country as well. So now I want to fast forward to another pivotal moment, because that was 1992 when I had that paperback version that you saw. So, you know, oftentimes authors have had the self-published experience or they've had the national published experience, but they haven't necessarily had both. And sometimes we can position one or the other as better. And it really depends on where you are in your journey. It depends on how much PR power you have and also what kind of media presence you have. So when you go for a national publishing book deal, they're not just looking at your work, the book, and how excellent it is. They're also looking at the author. So it's the book and the author together that they're looking at. If you self-publish, they're looking at your work, the published item. So it's a whole nother ballgame if you're looking at going the national book publisher route. It's not better or worse, but it's different, and they both are fabulous and perfect given where you are in your process. So I didn't know what happened that books were on the shelves at bookstores. I could not tell you what went on behind the scenes. I just thought I would walk in and see books in, you know, based upon categories around B. Dalton, but I had no idea the process behind the scenes that had a book on a shelf. So I was speaking in 1996 at the African American Women on Tour conference, really prominent conference that moved all around the country. One of the two of the people I met there, one was Susan L. Taylor, who was the editor of Essence at the time, but then also Iyanla Vanzant. How many of you are familiar with Iyanla? She used to be on Oprah's show as a recurring guest back in the early 2000s. And she also was a national or a New York Times bestselling author. And she was one of the keynote speakers at this conference. And my sister, ironically enough, graduated from Howard and was working on Iyanla's team as her executive assistant. So my sister introduced me to Iyanla at the conference. And as a show of support, Iyanla bought two of these books, not one but two, which I thought was interesting. And she was having a conversation with her literary agent a few weeks after the conference, Denise Stinson, and my book comes up in the conversation. And Denise takes an interest and says, "Can you send me a copy of that book?" And Iyanla did, which I'm very grateful for, because it can be easy to forget to do something like that. And then Denise called me a few weeks after getting the book and said, "Iyanla shared your book with me. It's about 75 pages long. Do you have more girth you can add to this book so that we can get it up to about 200 pages? I said, "Absolutely. I've been leading seminars, retreats, learning, observing, noticing about this whole concept of sacred self-care, what it really is about, and the depth of it. I definitely have more content that I could include in this book." And she says, "Well, I'm a literary agent, and the way it works is that if you are interested in your book getting presented to a national publishing house, then a literary agent is the one who pitches it. And especially if you want to get published by one of the big eight." So HarperCollins, who published my first book, is one of the big eight, Random House. There's other names you probably recognize, like Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, Scott Scholastic. Those are some of the big eight publishers. And so there began our journey of getting my proposal ready. So when you are a nonfiction writer and you want to prepare your literary agent with things to pitch to a national publishing house, it's the book proposal that's the operative instrument. And in that book proposal, it speaks about you, the author, because they want to know, what have you done in terms of media, promotion, marketing, what's your experience, without being aligned with them? What have you already done? Now the question becomes, back then it was what kind of media have you done? How many seminars, workshops, how big is your email list? Now, the first thing they do, to a fault, I think, is go right to your social media to see how many followers you have. To me, an email list is much more powerful because it's a specific piece of real estate where you can initiate a communication and arrive in that person's email box versus social media, which is passive, but followers. You're at their effect of whether they click or view. But to a fault, there's so much emphasis on social media these days. So in those days, those are some of the kind of things that publishers were looking at. In your book proposal, you have to include competitive analysis. So I also couldn't only know about my book, I also did research to explain, well, what other books are in this similar vein? And why is mine different? And why should they be interested in paying me money for the opportunity to market my book? Because that's what happens when you get a national book deal. They pay you in advance. And regardless of how well the book does or does not, that money is yours. Now, you don't start earning royalties until the book earns out, meaning they make back the equivalent of what they paid you in advance, but that money is yours. So it is a beautiful thing to get a national book deal because those advances, and you've probably heard stories about some of the advances people have gotten, celebrities, 2 commas in them. That's your money to keep. So here I was getting this proposal ready for my new literary agent, also representing Beyond the Van Zandt and Eric Jerome Dickey and Evelyn Harris and all the hot Black writers at the time. And here I was, just coming off of my little self-published paperback and smiling and dialing at independent bookstores around the country. But something very important happened in the early 90s. There was a renaissance, much like the era of the Harlem Renaissance 70 years earlier. There was a renaissance that was occurring among Black writers, and we were getting national book deals in record numbers as never before. Do you know what happened to stimulate that? Terry McMillan. Waiting to Exhale. New York Times bestseller list. Oh, Black people read not just historical civil rights books. So that is what changed the publishing industry. Because now, where it was a almost barricaded industry because your literary agent could be a gatekeeper. If no one picks you up to represent you, they're not pitching you to the nationals. And they only take 2% direct submissions. So unintentionally, it could be a great system for keeping people out. So Terry McMillan rewrote the game, like, hold up. A Black fiction author holding down the New York Times best-selling list for week after week. Also was the birth of the Black book clubs all over the country. Book clubs, people convening. And then of course, Oprah's book club that got America reading. Another Black woman that changed the landscape of the whole country. Terry changed the landscape of publishing for Black authors and created an opening because now the Jewish literary agents in New York and LA were actually placing phone calls to Black authors. What? May I represent you? So I want to just thank Terry McMillan for the opening that she created for me and so many other African-American authors. And I also want to thank Beyond the Van Zandt for sending a copy of my little paperback book to Denise Stinson and the opportunity to become a national published author. So now I send in my book proposal. They tell me that my book is going to come out. It took me about 9 months to get the book proposal ready. And It was February of 1997, which was the due date for the release of Sacred Pampering Principles. So this is the hardback version. When you get published by a national publisher, your hope is that they bring it out in hardback first. It's more expensive to produce a hardback book, and it shows their belief in the sellability. Because if half a life is hardback, you can come back and then they can also bring it out as paperback. 2 separate ISBNs, whole new promotion cycle, and so they brought it out in hardback. So this is one of those original hardback copies that even today, over 25 years later, you can still go to Amazon and get it because it's still selling. And actually in 2022, because of the surge in sales during the pandemic of this book, one of my team members said, Debrena, you should approach HarperCollins and see if they would be interested in bringing it out in audiobook form. Because when I was writing the book in 95 and 96, editing it and getting ready, the book proposal ready, and then in 97, the book coming out, audiobooks were not a thing. They weren't even, it wasn't even uttered in my contract. But see, when you're a national author, you don't just go and do an audio recording of your book yourself. Because what they pay you for is the opportunity to market your book in all these different forms, internationally, movie options, all that. And so I had to make a pitch to HarperCollins about why they should bring it out in a whole new form and invest in the voice talent to read the whole book. And people said, Debrena, you should read your own book. You should read your own book. It wasn't up to me. I have a national book deal, different scenario. But because I'm 3rd generation entrepreneur, because I worked in my family business, because my dad taught me about contracts, I negotiate quite shrewdly. And so in not only this contract, but also the contract for my second book, All the Joy You Can Stand, my 3rd book, The Love Lies, I negotiated consultative approval into my contract. So that the voice talent for Sacred Pampering Principles, the addendum said that I approve the voice talent. That the cover art, which can make or break a book, especially Black books, we love color, we love vibrancy. And when I would go to Black author conferences, and the authors that had gotten national book deals, as I was just now moving into the national book arena, that they always talk about their books getting bought and them not liking the book cover. And I said, I'm not gonna write a book and then not like the face of my book. And so I negotiated consultative approval so that I had to be happy with the cover before they went with that cover. Very unusual, but if you don't ask, right? So I had met Susan L. Taylor, you may recall me saying, at one of the African American Women on Tour conferences. And now I had a galley copy of the book in my hands. And the galley copy is the latest version of your book before the official book actually comes out. You get like 8 galley copies and you have a chance to check any final minor changes before they hit the go button and then produce thousands of your books. And so I thought to myself, I have a book on self-care and inner renewal for Black women. It's 1997. The premier magazine for forward-thinking Black women at the time was what magazine? Essence magazine. And it was growing in popularity and subscription base because of Susan L. Taylor and that new department she added to the front of Essence called In the Spirit. So I thought to myself, I want to get my galley into the hands of the editor-in-chief, Susan L. Taylor herself. So once again, I activated my feminine genius. And in those days, well, still today, FedEx packages are labeled to an individual, can be labeled to an individual. So I said, I am going to write a pitch letter. What was I drawing on? That public relations class at Pepperdine, the power of words. Put together a powerful letter, put it in a FedEx envelope with her name on it. And so she's the one who's supposed to open her own mail if her name is on it, right? It's illegal to open someone else's mail, US postal code, whatever. Well, Susan did get that FedEx package. And she did open that envelope. And she did read that pitch letter. And she agreed with what I said in that letter. I think this book would be amazing for your readers. And I think they would just love what this book is about. And so she handed it off to one of her assistant editors, Claire McIntosh, and Claire agreed. And she called and said, Debrena, your book comes out in February. We would like to do a feature on sacred pampering principles. So to get the leading Black women's magazine to do a feature on your nonfiction book at all is amazing. But in the month that it's nationally released is optimal. So that's exactly what happened. And now the book becomes a bestseller. Now let me tell you in that day how the best-selling situation works, because there's a then and there's a now. So in that day, you had to be on a list to be a bestseller book, or you had to sell at least 40,000 copies. So Essence had a bestseller list where they would pull the Black bookstores, from those independent bookstores I talked about earlier. They would call and pull those bookstores to find out what are your best-selling titles, aggregate the numbers, and then come out with their list. And so there was Sacred Pampering Principles, a bestseller, because it was on the Essence, a national publication bestseller list. The Washington Post has one, the New York Times has one. There's more than just one, is that the New York Times tends to be the best-known bestseller list, but not the only one. Or you have to sell 40,000 copies. That was then. A lot has changed in this era of Amazon for the literary world, and a lot of it I don't think is very good or healthy at all. So for example, to have if you look at my website, it says bestseller. It doesn't say on the books on the cover. But now, if you have your book on Amazon with over 175 different genres, you can go one day and be the top-selling title one day, and now I'm a best-selling author. And it happens all the time, especially with anthologies. You have people contribute to a book, you get all of them to buy the book on said day, so everybody can then say the next day, we're all best-selling authors. So the criteria for that has changed from where it was really based upon lists and hitting a certain number of sales versus one day, one genre, the top seller for a day can now have you using that language. So things have changed a lot since those days. So here I was with Sacred Pampering Principles as a best-selling book, and then in 2000, Denise says, Debrena, 1999 actually, Debrena, every couple of years you're going to bring out a new book. I'm still basking in the glory of the first one. Because when you get a national book deal in those days with a national publisher, they sent you on a book tour. They paid for your flight. They had a media escort meet you at the airport, take you to your hotel, be sure you got fed, take you to all of your media appointments, TV, radio. You had a publicist at the publishing house that would book all of those things. It was a very different day. Now, to get that level of service as a nationally published author, you have to be a celebrity, or Michelle Obama, or Hillary Clinton, or Obama. You now have to be a top celebrity or public figure to experience what was part of the national book deal. back in those days. So then All the Joy You Can Stand came out, and in between Sacred Pampering Principles and All the Joy You Can Stand, I had written a couple of articles for Essence. And so when it came time for my next book to come out, of course, they were like, yes, we want to do a feature once again of your book. And guess what happened? Once again, it hit the Essence bestseller list. So now I had 2 best-selling books. Now, it was 2000 when All the Joy You Can Stand came out, my second book. This one. And you see that one on the cover? They had to design that based on my specs. I said, I want her arms up. I want her wearing a beautiful, colorful dress. And they would send me examples. I'd say, nope, nope, I like that one, but change the yellow. That was the kind of consultative approval that I was able to have in my book. Unheard of, by the way. Then this book, I asked them to commission a Black female artist to do the cover. Now they have an in-house art department. And this new young author is asking me to pay extra money to commission a Black author to do it. Well, do you think they did it or not? Here you go. If you don't ask.
Genius.
So it's 2000. I've had 2 books now in Essence. I've written some articles. And in 2000, early in that year, some stirrings start to percolate. Oprah's going to have a magazine. Oprah's going to have a magazine. What's it called? She's not telling anybody. It's a secret. Are you sure? Is it a rumor? Oprah's going to have a magazine. So I get a phone call, from one of the associate editors at Essence, Michelle Buford, who had seen, she probably had to read my articles and edit my articles and had seen my name. And said, Debrena, Oprah is launching a magazine. She's recruited me. I work for her magazine now. Would you like to write a feature article for her new magazine? I put the phone on hold. Of course, Michelle, that would be wonderful. In August of 2000, the inaugural issue of O magazine came out. And they didn't even know the name. They didn't even know the name until like 2 months ahead of time. So what's the name of the magazine? They go, we don't even know yet. And that August 2000, that inaugural issue came out, and an article with Debrena Jackson, the little Black girl from Lacey Washington, was in that issue. So as I wrap up, I want to say a few things about branding, and then taking a department from Oprah's magazine called What I Know For Sure. I have a few final thoughts I want to share with you, and then I'll read my poem that I wrote when I was 16 and just close it out. So one of the things I would say for those who are authors is about branding. It's really about what are the themes, what are the concepts, and even the phrases that people think of when they think of your work. So if I say Maya Angelou, I could probably ask several of you what kind of themes or concepts or phrases come to mind, and they would start to resonate and sound very similar. If I say Toni Morrison, if I say Octavia Butler and other writers that have a very strong brand, there is a consistency in the themes, the concepts that you think of that are associated with that author. So that is what branding is about. When you hear a jingle, when you say a name, a phrase, or see certain colors or a logo, or the style of their writing, your name, or the product or the service is associated in your mind. So for example, with Sacred Pampering Principles, I was talking about inner renewal and body, temple, and joy, and being bodacious, and juicy living, and personal power. And so then here comes all the joy you can stand, and it's going higher and deeper, talking about sacred self-care, personal power, being juicy, being radiant, living life as a sacred self-caring woman. So people started to associate me with these phrases and this kind of vibe in the nonfiction space. So I would also encourage you, authors who are interested in creating a brand, look at consistency and constancy. What do you want people to associate you with when they think of you? So as I close, I want to share with you a few thoughts that I'll just call what I know for sure. One is something, there's three things I want to share. One of those things is something that many of you in this room, because we had so many people that were writers, have probably already thought about, which is that your written word outlives you. There aren't process is just as important as the writing of the book. Because we put so much emphasis on getting the book written and then editing. And so as a author who has come through the self-publishing journey and also the national publishing journey, whenever I can help another author, I always try to do so. So I have had tens and tens and tens and tens of manuscripts that have been sent to me, where I go somewhere, oh, I send you my manuscript, and I send you my self-published book, or they want me to give a quote, and I'm reading the manuscript, and I can tell they have not had it edited, not by a bestie, but by somebody who has literary, journalistic, English, or professional editing experience. And that's one of the things, unfortunately, that I want to caution us against, because we do not want in this era of masses of self-published books to now drop the quality because we're putting works out that are not excellent in terms of the editorial process. Okay? So when you are publishing a book, whether it is nationally published, whether it's self-published, factor in the editing phase. So don't say, oh, I'm submitting my manuscript to the publisher, and they're gonna get it word processed, and so 2 weeks later, factor in the editing. It's a very real part of the process, and it can make the difference between a good book and a great book, or a great book and a bestseller. The editing process, critical. And there's two levels of editing. There's general editing. So when I would have, especially when I would work with authors that still have, they're just formulating their manuscript, their outline, I'm looking at the flow, I'm looking at the transitions, I'm looking at the themes, I'm looking at the cohesion, and a lot of times those things were disjointed. Not to mention the copy editing, which is it a semicolon? Is it a colon? Is it a comma? Is it a paragraph break? Is it a new sentence? So there's two levels of editing, and you want to have editing at both levels, and don't cut any corners. The third thing I would say of what I know for sure is that marketing, 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 marketing is critical. Whether you are a nationally published author or a self-published author. And I think a lot of people think, oh, if you're a nationally published author because you have a publicist and the national publisher is taking care of the marketing and the booking you for media engagements, that the author just shows up for interviews or author book readings. And I never had that attitude because the book was a product. And I considered it a joint product with me at HarperCollins, or me at Random House, or me at Sunrise River Press. The third book is a nationally published book with the National Publishing House, but a smaller one. And so, whether you're nationally published or self-published, marketing is so important. So if you are working on a book, start working on the muscles right now of marketing a book, because you have so many options and you don't want to be overwhelmed. Okay, do I have a YouTube channel where I'm talking about my book? Do I do a self-funded book tour, which I did with my third book, because no longer were national publishers sending you on a book tour. It's like the times have changed. So I did a GoFundMe. I raised money. I went on a 23 city book tour. I said, I'm not going to not go on book tour. That's a critical part of marketing. And so again, activated my melanin genius. Okay, what am I going to do? Let's do a fundraiser. So get your marketing IQ up, up, up. If you need to also hire a publicist, or a Fiverr, somebody could do some freelance PR for you, it's worth it. But you also want to know how to market. I remember with my second book, All the Joy You Can Stand, Random House showed me the list of the cities I was going to. And there was 8 cities on the list. And then Susan L. Taylor's first book, In the Spirit, named after that column in Essence, came out, the book tour, because she had all the cities listed in Essence magazine. So, because I'm a marketer, remember that class at Pepperdine, third generation entrepreneur, marketing leads to sales. So I did my research to find out what cities have the most progressive professional women, have the most Black women Facebook clubs. And I said, oh, you need to add these cities to my list, because here's the research I found. Aren't we trying to sell the most possible? Well, what do you think happened? They added those 4 additional cities to the list. That's the marketing mind I was kicking in now. I'd already written the book, now I'm kicking into the marketing. So whether you have a business with certain products or services, whether you have a book, that's a product. You gotta know how to market. That's the difference between a beautiful product that sits there and a beautiful product that's actually engaged through a purchase, a transaction, a card swipe, exchange of money. Because that's the whole point of writing a book, not for it to sit in boxes in your garage or on shelves at Barnes & Noble or in a warehouse at Amazon. You want it in people's hands. So in between it on the shelf and in people's hands is marketing. So you want to get your IQ up on how to market. The last thing I'll mention, just as a note about marketing, each time a new form of your book comes out, it's an opportunity to market it. So the audio book of Sacred Pampering Principles came out in September of 2022. And they paid for the narrator, and they did the graphic design. I had consulted for approval, even on the audiobook cover. And I said, well, what do I want to do to market this? Well, now I have thousands and thousands and thousands of students all over the country, readers all over the country. So I put the word out, and I said, is anyone interested in hosting an audiobook listening party? And so I had 9 different listening parties going on all over the country, and we all connected via Zoom for 30 minutes together. Every city did their shout out, and it created a surge of sales of the audiobook. It didn't cost me anything. I was in Atlanta at the time, was at a speaking engagement at a friend's house on the national call, and there was women here in Seattle, in Tacoma actually, that were at the Super Funny Comedy Club. How many of you familiar with the Super Funny Comedy Club in Tacoma? Nate Jackson, that's my little brother, and my husband and I are part owners. So they're at the Super Funny Comedy Club doing a whole launch thing with over 60 women, and I'm in Atlanta at their launch location. So women's groups of women all over the country are tied together via Zoom link. So the options you have now as an author to market your product are things that were not even remotely imagined in the early 90s when it was novel for me to go on book tour, Sacred Pampering Principles, and have a clipboard and say, please write down your name and email address. And the bookstore owners would say, Debrena, that's so genius. You're collecting email addresses? Wow. So now to think about how you can have your own YouTube channel? Wow. So what I know for sure, marketing is the difference maker. So my time is about up, but I did want to at least take one question before I close out. I'm going to read to you a poem from the Libra, Debrena, before we go. I see a hand up there. Yes, my dear. Is that Quayle's daughter? Hello, honey. What is your question? Up here? That's such a great question. So this is one of the pages from my website. And as I mentioned earlier, remember I said an email address is one of the most important and powerful things you can have, even more so than a following are email addresses. So going back to when I was on book tour with the clipboard in '97, I've continued to always be about growing my email list because that's gold. So what you see here is what's called an opt-in. So that means you can opt in by sharing your name and email address. So I now have it, but I'm going to give you a free gift. And it's called the Sacred Self-Caring Woman's Toolkit. Now, the name of my first book, Sacred Pampering Principles. So now, if you were to share your email address, what you would get back is, the picture kind of cut it off, but you would get back an assessment with 10 questions. So you can find out, where you are on the self-care continuum. You would also get an audio recording set to music, my voice, reading 25 affirmations to live by. And you would also get the Sacred Self-Caring Woman's Manifesto. That's a very rich opt-in because normally you get one thing and I give women 3 things. So that is a screen that shows one of the marketing strategies that I use to build my email list. Of course, Mama Queenie.
What I noticed about waiting work brings some tools.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I love
Well, that's part of my brand. So if you see my landing pages, or you get something about a course or a program, or you go to one of my retreats and the colors, I have women wear different colors every retreat. So one retreat might be purple and gold, another retreat might be fuchsia and orange, another retreat might be yellow and white. So my brand is about vibrancy and colors. So people are very accustomed to, the brand is not just going to have some static picture. There's going to be a lot of colors that are going to pop. And I believe part of Melanin Genius is not being contained by what the Western American establishment says is here's the way you have to do things. And I'm really tired of this conforming to foreign methods. So I don't care what I'm a marketing master, I'm a 3rd generation entrepreneur, and I've sold millions of dollars phone systems for AT&T, millions of dollars of phone systems for Nat Jackson and Associates, our family business, led a direct selling team that generated $5 million, all Black women. So I knew how to market and sell things. And so I'm trusting my lived experience, not someone speaking possibly theoretically or using some Western American methods. And plus, who I'm appealing to is African American women. We love color. You gotta know your market. Beautiful. So I will close with this from Debrena, and it's called A Lesson on Life, Shoot for the Stars. Now, I was 16 when I wrote this, and I look back and say, wow, I was really kind of ahead of myself. I was only a sophomore in high school. So for everyone in this room that is a creative, which I know is every single one of us that works on projects, that has to activate discipline to get things written or drawn or finished or edited or produced or completed, this is for all of us. A lesson on life, shoot for the stars. Don't let others get you down. Set your pace or make you frown. It is all in the way you treat the situations that you meet. A person is stronger than they can believe, conquering things without any reprieve. The will and the might of just one person can be potent enough to fill any demand. The mind is capable of so very much, calculations, figurings, and more things as such. Don't ever underestimate what you can do, because achievement and success are waiting there too. Don't ever look down, always look up, and you shall reap with an overflowing cup. Hold that head proud and hold that head high and shoot for the stars with your goals as the sky. Convince them that they are not better than you through what you say and through what you do. It all depends on determination, you see. The harder you try, the better you'll be. So don't let them tell you that it can't be done. If you give up, you're beat before you've begun. Once we set goals, we must then firmly trust that those maybes become yes and those mights become must. So keep on believing. And don't you dare stop. At least not until you get to the top. Try your hardest and give it your best, and you shall emerge above all the rest. Dated 7/6/1983.
Wow.
Thank you, geniuses. Thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Wow. Wow. Woo! Genius. Just genius. Thank you. Wow. Wow. Miss Georgia, do you want to close? Thank you.
What is there to say?
Woo!
When I opened, well, there were several ways I thought of beginning. When I saw the books, I was just so surprised because I wanted to be so excited. But I love that Bible scripture, John, first chapter, first verse. You know that. In the beginning was the Word. That's what it is. It's the Word. And what we have to do is write the Word. Thank you so very, very much. It's just been wonderful. Come back tomorrow to get some more wonder. Okay?
Yes. Thank you. Woo! Yes. Debrena, can you go up there real quick? With that background, yes, it's just gorgeous. What's Georgia? Yes, please.